Hi, my name is Jeffrey Dungan. I'm co-founder and CEO of Really Active based in Montreal. And in this talk, we're going to talk about Kibana in a pandemic, more specifically, how you can analyze occupancy and interactions. So we won this award, right? And then there was like a pandemic. So that's my core team, Benoit, Camille, and myself on the right, Jeff. And in March 4th, 2020, we were in San Francisco accepting an Elastic award, which was really cool. And then a week later, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. And now it's October 5th, or whenever you're watching this. And we have lots of 18 months worth of experience and data to share about how you can use Kibana in a pandemic and beyond. So let's start with, what does Really Active do? Well, what we do is we develop open source software called Pareto Anywhere. And what this does is it takes all the ambient data in a physical space, which is things like wireless broadcasts from, let's say, the Bluetooth on your phone or from RFID or whatever. There's this whole cacophony of wireless that's in basically any physical space. And we just take that, crunch it, and then spit out in a machine readable way who or what is where and how. And then, of course, if you throw this data into Elasticsearch and then pull it out with Kibana, you also have a notion of when. And that's when you can put together some really cool dashboards like that one and everything that I'm going to talk about next. So let's go back to, why were we in San Francisco in March 2020 for an Elastic Award? And that was for making physical spaces searchable like the web. So think about how many people are occupying a physical space, where, when, how do these patterns change? So the dashboard that you see here, this is something that we displayed live while we were at ElasticCon. And in Kibana, it really lets you observe occupancy patterns, for instance, really well. So, of course, right after we were there, pandemic happens. So what does a pandemic look like from the perspective of location-aware spaces and through the lens of Kibana? Let's find out. So here is really a simple graphic that tells the story of the pandemic. What you're looking at here is every dot represents 1 week of data. And the graph starts in the end of 2019, December 2019, and goes until this summer. And then on the y-axis, what you're looking at is the peak occupancy of an office tower. So 100% means it's about the maximum when everyone's really there. And what you can see is there's this dip on the left at first. You might say, well, what's that glitch, Jeff? You go, no, it's not a glitch. That's Christmas and New Year's. You can see that people go off on holidays. It dips down, below the 50% occupancy rate, comes back up, and then March 11th, pandemic, you can see the drop off in occupancy in this office tower, and it never actually really recovers, little hicks and ups and downs. So this is kind of telling the story through Kibana of the pandemic in one straightforward graphic. So if you recall, around that time, March, April of last year, everyone in tech basically said, oh boy, we got this pandemic, this is real, this affects everyone. We're in tech, how do we help? And then everyone and their friend decided that contact tracing was the way to go, including even Apple and Google that were friends for a little bit to put together their contact tracing solution for mobile. So let's talk a little bit about contact tracing and Kibana. So the interesting thing in our case, we have University of Southern California as one of our clients, and they were already doing the equivalent of contact tracing starting 2019 to 2020 in the LA County Hospital. They weren't doing this for the pandemic. They're actually doing this because they wanted to, or they're doing a scientific study on who you interact with and where you spend your time during your workday influences your wellness at work. So in their case, what they were doing actually is they had these badges that were running Dirac, which is an embedded software that we make as well, that basically detected proximity of one another and then spat out data of who is with whom. Of course, we throw that data into Elasticsearch, pull it out with Kibana, and then it gives you a perspective of when. And so that they were doing that in parallel, completely independently of the pandemic, interestingly enough. And if you're interested, they published their previous work as a second iteration of a study. That's actually an open data set, which is really cool. And then the next iteration should be coming out shortly. And as a side note, the team on their first research did not use the Elastic Stack. On the second one, they did with our data. And they were really blown away by how easy it was to use Elastic Cloud to scale up and down. And it worked out to be a very pleasant experience for them. So USC was using it for the equivalent of contact tracing, but can you actually use Kibana for contact tracing in a pandemic? Let's find out. So in May of 2020, we were asked by a local telco to put together a more formal business-oriented contact tracing solution and to contribute on our side some of the hardware and the software for at least the prototype. So in the month of May, we struggled to put together all the hardware of a contact tracing bracelet, which is what you see here. A lot of these devices I actually hand screwed myself. These are really made with a lot of love and sweat. And then we quickly whipped up the software side of it for testing in Kibana. And I have to say that probably 98 or 99% of the effort went into the hardware. And then Kibana was really the easy part. So let's take a look now at what contact tracing in Kibana actually looks like. So here's a screenshot from what we used in the prototyping phase with this contact tracing bracelet solution for enterprise. And what you see on top is a search bar. And there you can just punch in the instance ID of the bracelet or the pendant, the device that the person is wearing. Here, we're not putting in the person's name or anything because, again, nobody wanted to put personal data into a compromised system. Most people just kept a list of who had which bracelet. Someone from HR would keep it in a drawer or, better yet, in a locked cabinet. And it's only then if you had a positive case that you would go and search. So here you would go, you'd look up the bracelet ID of whoever maybe tested positive, and then all the rest that you see below that comes out. So for instance, you have this contact tracing table, which is ordered by with whom you had the most interactions. So we call that a risk factor because you can't exactly count how long people spent and how close. There's no real perfect way to do that. We just called it a risk factor. And in that case, you can just export that data. Most people print that out and then go through their list and take a look at, and call up the people that were involved. Interestingly enough, the download CSV function, we wrote a tutorial on that, to help people out. And it's actually one of our the best ways to find us through Google. You just look up export data CSV in Kibana and probably our tutorial comes up. The other really neat thing that came out of this, which is different than other contact tracing solutions, and then this again speaks to Kibana being able to explore data in fun ways, is we took a look at when are the most interactions happening. And because with these bracelets, you can actually capture data in real time if you have the right infrastructure in place. You can then take a look, and that's the little orange graph that you see there, and say, it sounds like most of these interactions are happening before lunch. So if you're going to send someone out to check what's going on, you know when to send them out. And then finally, there's a battery level monitoring. And one of the big challenges with contact tracing is it consumes a lot of battery, especially if you're giving feedback for social distancing. So that was an important function, which I want to talk about a little bit more now. So as much as prototyping the interface in Kibana for contact tracing was wonderful and great, the part that really helped us on the development and engineering side was looking at the data of how did the batteries on these devices drain. So we were collecting that data just kind of for free again. And then a lot of time that we spent was really looking at graphs like these, where on the x-axis, you see about a week of data. And on the y-axis is the battery percentage, which is never a really accurate measurement, but it's best you have. And then you look at how things drop off, and then you can start comparing different firmware types, the different ways you use configurations with feedback and stuff to try and stretch the battery to a reasonable length, whether it's 48 hours or 7 days. Kibana was super helpful for that because we could just really punch in the queries easily and find what we wanted. So we talked about the obvious contact tracing scenario, but are there any other applications of Kibana in a pandemic? And I think you can see where this talk is going. Yes, we were pleasantly surprised to find a few others. So one thing where Kibana really shines is it makes it easy to say, that's unusual, that's weird, what's going on? So let's take a look at this heat map, which is a great way that we often start by sharing and showing data to our clients. Here you're looking at 4 weeks of data on the x-axis, and then you're looking at all the different rooms in a building on the y-axis. And you can pretty clearly here, I think, see that there are 2 weeks that stand out in 3 different zones. This is conference rooms 5A, B, and D. And you might say, why is there this spike in occupancy? What we're looking at here when it's red is you're saying there's more ambient data, there's more people and their devices occupying these spaces. So what is this that we're looking at? And actually, in this case, it's vaccinations. So this is a system that's deployed in a clinic, in a CLSC, call it in Quebec, with the Jewish General Hospital. And they were using their conference rooms actually for doing vaccinations at one point during the pandemic. We showed them the data. They're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. You could see that. Because at the end of the day, they set up this trial to do asset tracking, because hospitals lose really expensive equipment and that costs a lot of money to send people to go and find it. But because we're just collecting all this information for free about ambient data, we were able to find that unique case of determining, the vaccinations were done there. So it's just a way to show that you can get that, that's weird, and then see something very interesting in the data through Kibana. Also on this one, just to hammer home how cool it is and how accessible this really is, the pilot project that we did with them in this clinic was actually deployed within a week. And that's about how long it takes before you start to have interesting data to look at and share. So in this case, we deployed the hardware, started collecting data for a week, and then we're able to share it with the client. And then, wow, that's really cool. So let's go a little bit further on what you can see in a week. So we often ask the question: are we slowly getting back to normal? Is this normal the new normal? What's going on? So of course, data can tell the story of that. So what can Kibana tell us about the story of that data? So let's compare pre and post-pandemic patterns in Kibana. So remember, I talked about just looking at a work week. Often that's a great unit of time to see some very interesting patterns. So here what you see on top is a work week in an office cafeteria. This is a different office now. Over the course of a week. So you see the clear Monday to Friday pattern of little spikes. And in food services, we often call this the crown. So you'll see the spike for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if it's very lunch focused, you might call it the middle finger, which is kind of what you see here. Clearly lunch is the strong point in this office cafeteria. And then on the bottom, you'll see, again, same space, same setup, but July of this year, and this is the first week that people came back to work. And you can see some of the tendencies actually come back, where lunch is usually the strong point. You start to see that around Wednesday and Thursday. But you also see some differences. Like for instance, on Fridays, it doesn't look like people are coming in. And we asked the client, is that the case? And they said, yeah, we've decided that we're doing 4-day work weeks. So the data speaks the story of what is normal, what is the new normal here. So to start summarizing, what I love about working with physical spaces, Kibana, and data that talks about people's real environment is that when we return to the workplace now, there's really a once in a generation opportunity. Things have changed so much that we can really make a breakthrough in wellness, productivity, and efficiency. And Kibana really empowers individuals to make sense of their world, like their physical world, their actual surroundings of what's really happening. And then based on that information to make continuous improvements for good. So here's what I mean by that, especially with the latest versions of the Elastic Stack with 7.13, 7.14, which are much more user-friendly, getting to dashboards, Canvas, and everything. You can genuinely have a dashboard per user, per person. So for instance, in retail, it might look like that, in healthcare or in manufacturing, where what you're communicating is exactly what matters to an individual or a specific team so that they can make the best decisions. And the amazing part is that at a certain point, we just hand that over to the client, or they just appropriate it themselves and just start setting this up and adjusting their data to feedback and finding those, that's weird moments and continuously improving. So that's been my lightning talk. I thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of ElasticON.